You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Hello, I am Steven Willis, host of the Locked On Ole Miss podcast, and he is Zach Barrett, practice goer extraordinaire from the Rebel Walk. Zach, there was a scrimmage this weekend, and the scrimmage was closed, which basically means you either had to work for the team or have a bunch of money to see it.
Right.
And none of those guys are talking. But at the press conference today, Lane Kiffin talked about that and said the defensive line specifically kind of showed out in that scrimmage.
I can't say I'm surprised, Steven. And here's the thing. You got to understand right now, John Garrison and the offensive line are actively competing to try and find and figure out who's going to play where. So when they're going up against a defensive line who seems to have everything figured out, veterans, young players, and just overall an abundance of talent, it's not a shock to me. I will say, backing off what Lane said, Chris Hardy is definitely a guy who showed out in practice, a guy who can play on the inside, who can play edge. He can even play linebacker if you like, but he mentioned rotations and having a bunch of different defensive line rotations. I think that's a guy who kind of allows those rotations to happen. And then obviously your everyday guys, Jared Ivey, Pegues, Walter Nolan, Prince Emmanuel. There's so many different options that they have. And again, I'm not shocked at all to really hear that, but hopefully, the offensive line can start to piece it together and figure it out as we get closer and closer to game day.
I didn't detect from Lane's voice too much of a worry that they were going to be able to do it.
For sure.
But he was excited, and you can tell he's excited because he mentioned this specifically, that the defensive linemen that they have, when they play really well, have the potential to take over ball games. And that is a situation that Ole Miss fans haven't seen since probably 2008 is the last time that's been an actual thing that could happen.
You're exactly right. I mean, even last year, I thought the defensive line was pretty good, but it's not even comparable to this year. And a game that comes to mind for me is, going to Baton Rouge and, you're playing LSU. They have two of the best offensive tackles in college football. Well, those edge rushers like Ivy, Umamielen, what if it's Perkins coming off the edge, and those interior guys are going to set the stage for that entire game. Are you pressuring LSU? Are you cutting off the run game? Are you forcing them to make stupid passes? Things like that you're going to have to do if you want to win on the road, especially in Death Valley and other, obviously, SEC stadiums.
Yeah, and Lane also talked about they threw the ball a good bit in the scrimmage. They were working on the pass game. And it's kind of interesting because Kaden Lee, who also got interviewed today, described this unit as the best wide receiver unit in the country. Lane Kiffin described Trey Harris as the team's most improved player, which that should scare the heck out of everybody. And there's a couple of pieces that Lane's still waiting on, not worried about, but just letting people know that, hey, we're waiting on these pieces. I like where this pass game is sitting, and they're going to throw the football this year, but it's not because of anything deficiently in the running back position.
Not at all, Steven. And the thing I like is Henry Parrish talked about it last week. They're really starting to get the running backs involved in the passing game too. And, when Judkins was there getting 30 carries a game, it really wasn't as much of an option because you didn't need to do that. But you have guys like Bentley and Parrish with elite speed, elite footwork, and really good agility who are able to bounce off on the side, catch a screen pass or two. And when the defense is focused on guarding Trey Harris, Juice Wells, Jordan Watkins, and Caden Priestcorn, I'm not sure they're going to be expecting a screen route from Ulysses Bentley, who can make every defender miss and take it for 40 yards down the field. So it's just another aspect of versatility that I think's really going to start to expose some SEC defenses this year.
And let's go forward to today's practice. What stood out for you? What kind of was noticeable from you guys' perspective today?
Yeah, so we mentioned it earlier, Steven, but Micah Davis from Utah State, he's an absolute freak. Especially, in terms of speed, in terms of being that slot receiver. At Utah State, he returned 28 punts for 250 yards. He returned 6 kick returns for 83 yards. Just a really he's like a Swiss knife out there. And I wasn't really expecting to see him play in the offense as much as he did today because, when he came in, he transfers in late. You're expecting to see him strictly more on special teams. But he got a great deal of reps at the slot. Lane mentioned he can play on the outside too. Again, when game time comes around, I'm not sure how much time he'll be seeing in that wide receiver role with such a stacked room, but he definitely has the potential to do so. And, if there's an injury with Jordan Watkins or any receiver that may be, I think he's a great piece to fill in for sure.
What Lane is known for doing, whatever the biggest problem from a year prior to this year, he is going to fix that hole. And I bring this up 2 years ago or 3 years ago, whenever Ole Miss went to Auburn. That was the Matt Corral game.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got injured, but all the receivers were hurt that day. You had John Rice Plumlee and Shakur Pearson was the number one wide receiver. Well, all of a sudden, Lane Kiffin said, hey, we're never going to go through that situation again. So now he's going 9 deep in a wide receiver room, even though they might not get on the field in a particular game. Last year before Auburn, Jordan Watkins broke his hand.
Yeah.
And they had to put Dayton Wade back to return punts. Dayton Wade's a great receiver, had excellent hands, but he struggled because he didn't do that on a consistent basis. Jordan Watkins had to go back there and catch punts with a broken hand. So you bring in Micah Davis. So if something happens to Jordan Watkins or something like that, that is taken care of. What I've seen from Lane Kiffin is that he learns from his previous years. He makes a note and he makes action on it.
1000%, Steven. And that is such a great point. You look at literally every position this year. Obviously, after the Georgia game, he said we need to get size, strength, speed on the interior, on the defensive and offensive line. He goes out and does that. And especially in this wide receiver position, because, it's important. When Trey Harris got hurt last year, there definitely was a shift in kind of the mode of the offense when we're going against Alabama and Tuscaloosa. There's no one
with Trey Harris, they beat Alabama.
Say it again?
With Trey Harris, they beat Alabama that day.
That's what I'm saying. There was no sort of passing attack because Trey's out. But now when Trey gets hurt this year, here's Juice Wells for you. Oh, okay. If Deion Smith ever gets cleared to play, here's Deion Smith. Oh, okay. Micah Davis can fill in the slot if Jordan Watkins gets hurt. There's so many different players that you can fill in here. And by the way, like you said, if Trey Harris is the most improved player this offseason, I am so concerned for opposing defenses, Steven.
And I've talked all offseason. One of the main things of topics on my podcast this offseason is everything that Lane Kiffin has done this season as far as roster construction is designed to take double teams off of Trey Harris to make it to where you can't double him consistently.
Yeah.
And now I think we see why.
And you can't you double Trey. Here's Juice Wells, go route, touchdown. How do you defend that? And then I want to ask you, Steve, did you see the clip of Caden Prescorn making that one-handed catch last week?
Yeah, he's doing his thing again. Yeah.
We really didn't get the full taste of Caden Prescorn last year, except in that Penn State game. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do over the middle of the field.
Yeah, it should be really interesting. Who else stood out for you at practice today? Who's making a name for themselves early?
Yeah, so one of the things I wanted to talk about was Preston Cushman because, he's a bigger dude. We've heard his name forever, it seems, with the Ole Miss offensive line, but he's getting a lot of work at tackle, specifically right tackle behind Micah Pettis. And that's kind of been a change for me because we've seen him work at guard. I think he might have even taken some snaps at center in the years past. But again, just another huge depth piece for Ole Miss because, as you know, offensive linemen, it's very easy to get hurt. But he's working in there. So if Diego Pounds or Micah Pettis were to get injured in that tackle spot, I would definitely expect Preston Cushman to come forward. And I think he's a great second option. So it puts a lot of confidence in John Garrison and that offensive line, for sure.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. When we come back, we'll talk to Zach about who has stood out in this first half of fall camp. But first, I do want to let you know, passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every single time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need and the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Listen, I love sports. I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games. And the sports just stop sporting the way we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep these sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up any bets anytime I am in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. Maybe you can bet on Ole Miss's over-under on wins, which is currently sitting at 9.5, or Ole Miss being minus 122 to make the college football playoff, or perhaps Jackson Dart at plus 1,500 to win the Heisman Trophy. Maybe they are your bets of choice. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So go to FanDuel.com and learn more. FanDuel is the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all of that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today. It's a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you each and every single day with all the biggest stories without all of that screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't miss analysis, opinions, and news, all streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every single day. So, Zach, you've been out at practice most of the fall, and what has stood out to you? What are your takeaways at this halfway point?
Yeah, Steven. So I think the first thing is that the passing game of Ole Miss it seems to be undefendable at certain points. But on the flip side, looking at the defense, we talked about it earlier. I think that defensive line has a chance to lead the country in sacks, tackles for losses, things like that. And then two players specifically who I wrote an article about sometime last week were the sophomores, Aiden Williams and Kaden Lee. They're really working to make a name for themselves, Steven. And I know it's going to be difficult. That wide receiver room is stacked. But again, if there's any sort of injury or any concern really in any of the well-being of those wide receivers, you don't need to force anyone to play. If Juice Wells isn't feeling great in week 2, that's fine. Let's rest Juice Wells, give Kaden Lee and Aiden Williams a chance because they are that talented. And I think next year, you're just in the best possible situation. Obviously, if they don't transfer, but those are two guys who are continuing to take steps forward seemingly every single week, and they're getting a lot of reps, especially with the first team, even sometimes the second team. But they're making plays, and they look really, really good out there.
Yeah, Kaden Lee and Aiden Williams, they're kind of like Gambit from the Deadpool movies. Like,
yes.
Ooh, I'm about to make a name for myself. Ooh.
Exactly. No, and they're going to, Steven. At some point this year, I would expect them to both have some really big games or even some big moments for Ole Miss.
Any surprises through this first half of fall camp?
I'm trying to think here. I will say, I think the secondary is in a much better position than I thought it would be. Sometimes it can be difficult to really piece a bunch of different guys together, especially, there's so many transfers. You got Trey Amos, Isaiah Hamilton, Lewis Moore, Key Lawrence, all these different guys trying to come together, especially in a group that needs to communicate at all times. And they're doing a great job. And, going further on that, they're going against the best wide receiver core in America, according to Kaden Lee. So it's been impressive. And then I did see you talk about this player last week, but TJ Daugherty, absolute stud, Steven. He's going to get a lot of playing time. And it irritates me that he wasn't eligible last season because I think he would have blossomed. But, it's saving quite a surprise for this defense for this year.
Yeah, I think it was today's show actually was about TJ Daugherty being the surprise of fall camp, and that there's a chance he could end up at Mike linebacker, kind of being the alpha linebacker. And that isn't anything denigrating Pooh Paul. He's exactly what Ole Miss thought it was. I think that's a compliment towards TJ Daugherty more so than anything towards Paul. And I think both of those together, that's a nice front line of linebackers behind that defensive line whenever they're ready to go.
You nailed it, Steven. Both of those guys, interchangeable, are super, super talented. And even, TJ, yeah, he can play the mic, but, he's another guy who, if Pete Golding for some reason wants to blitz him off the edge, he can do just that too. But both those guys, in terms of being in coverage, staying at the mic position, I think they're going to be incredible leaders, especially Poop Paul. He's been battling a little bit of an injury. He's been in a non-participant jersey for a tiny bit, but he's finally starting to work himself back. And just a really big dude out there. He's noticeable first glance at the field. And he has all the leadership qualities to become truly, the guy that everyone looks to in this defense, and someone who can also mentor TJ Daugherty, who doesn't have that experience in the SEC.
Yeah, I also think it's important for people to realize this watching this. Lane does load management. So just because they're in a no contact jersey doesn't mean they're necessarily hurt.
Yes, 100%. And they make sure to tell us that all the time. They're like, guys, that doesn't mean they're injured. So I'm glad you made that clear for me, Steven.
Yeah, it's a situation because whenever you'll see this on Twitter all the time to where so-and-so's in a black jersey. Oh my gosh, he's hurt. All this is like, no, that's not what's going on. This is all part of the ramp up where you're practicing, but you're going to take away some of the contact. This is all a part of what Lane's talking about.
Exactly, Steven. And one of the final things I want to hit on is just how impressed I've been with Lane and the staff he's assembled, because he really understands that this season has the potential to be 15 or 16 games or however long it is. And he really, he's taking it easy on the guys. He talked about it in the spring, but you're seeing it now. I think they really only had 3 practices last week, and it's exciting. It's going to make these boys hungry for game day. And I think the result is it's going to be evident the second the Ole Miss hits the field.
Thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Zach Mareth from the Rebel Walk. We made it halfway through fall camp. We're getting closer to that Furman kickoff. What do you got going on this week, bud?
We're just hitting the practice fields again, Steven, and keeping our eyes on for Ole Miss, just waiting for that clock to tick to August 31st, sir.
All right. Well, I will talk to you next Monday, but until then, man, best of luck.
Will do. Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.